The storm came fast across the plains, not the kind that announces itself slowly with gentle rain and distant thunder. This one arrived like something alive. The cattle felt it first. Thousands of longhorns shifting nervously in the dark. Horses pulling against their ropes. Cowboys waking to a pressure in the air they could not quite explain. And somewhere beyond the firelight, a trail boss named Eli Mercer stared into the northern horizon. Because out on the cattle trails, a man learned something early. Nature didn't care whether you were ready. And when the herd finally broke loose in the middle of the night, 4,300 head of terrified cattle running blind through the lightning and mud, and the only thing standing between survival and disaster was a handful of exhausted cowboys willing to ride straight into the chaos. Howdy, Chip Schweiger here. Welcome to another edition of Way Out West, where the stories of the American West are told, cowboy wisdom is earned, and the legacy of the American cowboy still rides on. There are some sounds that belonged only to the old cattle trails. The creak of saddle leather before daylight, coffee boiling over a mesquite fire, spurs brushing against stirrups in the dark. And then there was the sound cowboys feared most. A herd beginning to run. Not drifting, not moving, running. Because once fear spread through thousands of head of longhorn cattle at night, a trail drive could turn deadly in seconds. The Old West demanded a particular kind of courage from the people who lived it. Not loud courage, not theatrical courage, steady courage. The kind built slowly through hardship, responsibility, exhaustion, and long miles under unforgiving skies. Most cowboys weren't gunfighters or outlaws. They were working men trying to hold things together in conditions that often pushed human endurance to its limit. And on one storm-torn night in 1876, a handful of men found themselves facing one of the most dangerous moments any trail crew could encounter: a full stampede in the dark. Tonight, we're telling that story. After the episode, check out the show notes at wayoutwestpod.com/cowboy stampede story. By the fall of 1876, the great cattle trails of the American West were already becoming legendary. Texas longhorns moved north by the hundreds of thousands. Cowboys pushed herds across rivers, through storms, around hostile territory, and into railheads that connected the frontier to eastern markets hungry for beef. The work was brutal. Most trail drives lasted months. Cowboys slept on the ground, ate beans, biscuits, salt pork, and drank black coffee. Worked from before sunrise until long after dark. And despite the romantic image Hollywood later created, most cowboys were not gunfighters. They were laborers. Underpaid, sunburned, bone-tired, but skilled. Very skilled. A good trail outfit operated almost like a military unit. Everybody had a role, everybody depended on each other. And in the fall of 1876, one of those outfits was moving north through the open plains under the leadership of a trail boss named Eli Mercer. Mercer wasn't famous. No dime novels were written about him. No town statutes carried his name. But men trusted him. And in the West, that mattered more than fame ever did. He'd spent nearly 15 years on the trail by then. Started as a wrangler, worked his way up, learned cattle the hard way. But men under him said Mercer could read a herd almost like a man reads weather. He knew when cattle were too tightly packed, knew when they were thirsty, knew when one nervous steer might start trouble for the entire drive. because cattle were emotional animals. People forget that. A herd could stay calm for days, then panic over one lightning strike, one rattlesnake, one sudden sound in the dark. And once fear spread through a herd, it spread fast. The outfit Mercer led that year was pushing more than 4,000 longhorns north towards Dodge City. 12 hands, one chuck wagon, a remuda of horses, weeks from home. The youngest cowboy on the drive was a kid called Little Tom. 19 years old, Arkansas born, still trying to prove he belonged. And like a lot of young cowboys, he imagined trail life would feel adventurous. The reality turned out to be dust, saddle sores, sweat, and exhaustion so deep a man could fall asleep sitting upright beside a fire. Still, Little Tom loved it, because for all its hardship, there was freedom out there too. Endless country, big skies, campfire laughter at night. The strange brotherhood that forms when people survive difficult work together. And according to Tom, years later, everything changed the night the storm rolled in. The warning signs started before sunset. The herd grew restless. Nothing dramatic at first, just subtle changes. Steers crowding tighter together, heads lifting toward the horizon, horses acting uneasy. Old trail hands notice these things. Experienced cowboys watch cattle the same way sailors watch the sea. At supper that night, the cook was serving beans and sourdough biscuits when Little Tom finally spoke up. "Feels wrong tonight." A few of the older cowboys laughed. One muttered, "Storm's got the kid nervous." But Mercer looked north, and that was when he saw it. Lightning. Far away, no thunder. Just flashes silently lighting the horizon, and that bothered him. Out on the plains, weather traveled differently than it did back east. Storms built across enormous distances, and cowboys learned to read them carefully. Mercer stood there for a moment beside the fire, then quietly told the men, "Sleep light tonight." That alone made the camp uneasy, because Eli Mercer wasn't a nervous man. By midnight, the air had changed completely. The temperature dropped sharply, wind died to almost nothing. Then the silence became heavy. There's something people still describe before major storms: the silence. No insects, no breeze, no movement, just pressure. Little Tom later said it felt like the whole prairie was holding its breath. Then came the smell. Rain, cold earth, electricity. One cowboy stood from his bedroll and said, "She's coming," and then it hit. First came the wind. Hard western wind slamming across the plains with enough force to scatter sparks from the campfire deep into the grass. The chuck wagon canvas snapped violently. Horses jerked against their ropes. Then lightning exploded overhead. And somewhere inside the darkness, one steer bolted. And that's all it took. Within seconds, thousands of longhorns erupted into motion. The sound was unbelievable. Not just loud, physical, like thunder rolling across the very earth itself. Men who survived stampedes often struggled to describe them afterwards. Some said it sounded like an avalanche, others said it felt like the ground shaking beneath them. The truth was simpler. It sounded like fear. Pure animal panic multiplied thousands of times over. Cowboys flew into saddles half awake, rain slashed sideways through the darkness. Lightning flashed so brightly, men could briefly see the entire herd surging across the prairie before vanishing back into blackness. Mercer shouted the only order that mattered: "Turn the leaders!" Because no cowboy stopped a stampede head on. That only got a man killed. The trick was to slowly bend the front of the herd into a circle. Let momentum eventually work against itself. Keep the cattle moving until exhaustion overcame panic. Simple in theory, terrifying in practice. especially in darkness, especially in mud, especially while riding inches away from thousands of terrified animals weighing over 1,000 pounds each. Little Tom rode beside Mercer during the worst of it. The kid was terrified. At one point, his horse stumbled hard enough he nearly went under the herd. Another cowboy grabbed his slicker and hauled him upright before the cattle crushed him beneath the hooves. The rain became blinding, and through it all, Mercer stayed focused. No panic, no wasted movement, just absolute concentration. At one point, Tom shouted over the storm, "How do you know what to do?" Mercer answered without turning his head. "Because they're scared," he yelled back, "and scared things run blind." That line stayed with Tom the rest of his life. Hours passed. The men kept pushing. Slowly, almost invisibly at first, the herd began curving, then circling, then tiring, and finally, near dawn, the stampede broke. Morning arrived gray and cold. Steam rose off the cattle. Mud coated everything. The prairie looked torn apart. One cowboy had a broken wrist. Another lost his bedroll entirely. Several horses were cut up from rocks and brush in the dark. But nobody died. And considering what could have happened, that was remarkable. Cookie rebuilt the fire. Coffee boiled again. Men sat silently in wet clothes, too exhausted to speak much. Little Tom later remembered watching Mercer sit alone for several minutes staring out across the herd. Then finally the old trail boss said something quietly. "I was scared too." Tom looked at him in surprise. Mercer gave a tired smile. Difference is, somebody had to ride toward it. That may be one of the most honest descriptions of courage the Old West ever produced. Because real frontier courage usually was not fearlessness. It was responsibility. The movies gave us fearless gunslingers standing tall without hesitation. But the real West was built mostly by ordinary people carrying heavy burdens in hard conditions because nobody else could do it for them. Cowboys, mothers, ranchers, freighters, homesteaders, and lawmen. People who were scared and kept going anyway. And maybe that's why these stories still resonate now. Because life still sends storms. Different kinds. Financial storms, personal storms, family struggles, business failures, loss, fear, uncertainty. And in those moments, most people are not looking for someone fearless. They're looking for somebody ready. Somebody willing to ride toward the problem instead of away from it. The myth survived, but the reality still matters. The great cattle drives eventually disappeared. Barbed wire closed the open range. Railroads changed transportation. The frontier itself slowly faded into history. But something deeper survived. The values. Responsibility, calm under pressure, loyalty to the outfit, the willingness to carry difficult things because others depended on you. Those ideas still matter. Maybe now more than ever. And perhaps that's one reason the stories of the West continue to endure long after the trails themselves disappeared into the grass. And now, one final question before we ride out. Was Eli Mercer real? Was Little Tom? Did this exact stampede actually happen? Well, parts of it are rooted deeply in the real history of the cattle trails. The dangers were real. The storms were real. The stampedes were very real. But like a lot of stories handed down across the West, sometimes the line between history and legend starts to blur. And maybe that's fitting, because the West was built on both. Okay, before we close out for this week, we've got just one more thing. Yep, that distinctive call means Buster the Bull is back. And that means it's time for our cowboy glossary term of the week. And this week's term is stampede. So a stampede is a sudden, uncontrolled rush of frightened livestock, usually cattle or horses, often triggered by storm, predators, or unexpected sounds. On the cattle trails, stampedes were one of the most dangerous situations cowboys ever faced. Well, that's all for this episode, and thanks for riding with me here way out west. If you've enjoyed this journey through history, share it with a friend. That way we reach more fans of the American West. And if you're so inclined, I'd appreciate it if you'd rate us or review us on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. And remember, the West story belongs to everyone who lived it and to all of us who still carry it forward. Until next time, this is Chip Schweiger, reminding you to ride steady and keep your eyes on the horizon. We'll see you down the road.